I'd like to begin again by orienting us to what we're doing and why, lest this turn into something like just a Sunday Dhamma talk kind of thing. The intention is to contribute to our understanding as a community of what we're doing and why, what the direction of it is, and to have that enter us so fully that it's immediately accessible and meaningful, and in fact becomes the direction of the heart, becomes the intention, the direction of the heart. And when Jan and Phyllis were here, which is 3/4 of the Teachers Council, Mary couldn't make it. This particular quote that I'm reading and that I read last week was offered for us to orient in that way. And then it was suggested that for an organization lacking in ritual, that this might be a good place to begin to touch and establish and insert certain kinds of ritual elements in what we do. So this is offered for your infusion. Mine is tomorrow. As for the qualities of which you may know, these qualities lead to dispassion, not to passion. To being unfettered, not to being fettered. To shedding, not to accumulating. To modesty, not to self-aggrandizement. To contentment, not to discontent. To seclusion, not to entanglement. To aroused persistence, not to laziness. To being unburdensome, not to being burdensome. You may categorically hold this is the Dhamma, this is the Vinaya, this is the teacher's instruction. So last week, we began to explore dependent origination, paticca samuppāda. And we're exploring, as I said, with a purpose. And the purpose is the kind of understanding that leads to this kind of result of shedding, not accumulating, to aroused persistence, not laziness, and so on. And to have that available as we do our actual work. So this week, I'm going to continue with paticca samuppāda, dependent origination, and God willing and a clear mind offered, I'm going to bring us into an examination of how the mind is building the world between us, and specifically the role of consciousness in connecting, if you will, or being the common element, the binding element between our conditioned internal universe that each of us bring and the universe of others. So in that sense, it's a how is this dependent origination teaching talking about, if I can use your voice, my mind when I'm in relationship with others doing stuff. And understanding, of course, that it's an extremely subtle teaching. So in that sense, we acknowledge that we're touching the surface, because the more concentrated one gets, the deeper one sees into these same dynamics. It's like looking down into let's say a silty tide pool. And, the water, a wave has just come, which is, of course, our thoughts and emotions and desires, cravings, and so on. The floods, basically, and the mind is flooded. And we look in, and we can still sort of see some waves on the surface, and we can see some sand and algae floating around. And we say, oh yeah, the Buddha named the sand, he named the algae, he named the waves. And as it's longer between waves, the sand begins to settle, and the creatures crawl under their rocks temporarily. And we begin to see more and say, oh, look at that sand. Look at all the parts in that sand. And wow, there's creatures even under the sand and whatever we see. And it's longer between waves, and we see more deeply, and we see the sides of the tide pool, and we see how it's contained, and we begin to see things that we just could not see before. That's the role of samadhi, of concentration, the stilling of the mind, to see into the nature of actuality. So I don't want to fool us into thinking, oh, we're really getting all of paticca samuppada. This is the depth of it. That's not true. At the same time, it is a description of the tide pool. It is true. So we just go in with a kind of humility, learning what we can. And in fact, if our work does conduce to shedding and to not accumulating, to modesty and not to self-aggrandizement, then naturally there will be a calming of the mind, even in action. And when there's a calming of the mind in action, to some extent anyway, we'll really begin to see how we're doing this together. And of course, then in the absence, remember the paticca samuppada formula, when this arises, this will arise. When this is present, this will arise. When this is not present, this will not arise. And we might begin to say, oh, so that's also possible. So let's just keep that kind of that direction, that overall purpose, and the nature of the teaching in mind. So a very, very short recap. Avijja paccaya sankhara. Dependent upon ignorance arise constructions, constructing activities, sankhara. And we explored actually in dialogue also how each moment that there's blindness, the momentum of life, the momentum of our entire history comes up as real. And from this, there's the beginning of, if you will, the world, the blueprint by which we construct the world, the sankharas, the formations that have accumulated. Dependent upon ignorance arise these constructing activities, constructing tendencies. It's like an image that I offered was the stream rushing downhill. It doesn't just start mid-hill. It comes from somewhere, right? Well, that's you and me. And from that, we, as you'll see, construct the past and the future and get into trouble. So it all begins with that unconsciousness, that avijja, ignorance. Avijja paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya vijnana. Key point, right? Dependent upon these constructing activities rushing forward, consciousness takes rise. So the consciousness that takes rise is the consciousness based on ignorance, flooded. And this then is the not just how we see the world, it is the seeing of the world, vijnana, the knowing of the world, the basis of, you might say, the apprehending that can happen in all of its details, some of which we'll cover in just a moment today. But to get that sense of, as you listen to me right now, how is listening happening? How is, let's say, as you sit there, how is it possible that there's the listening and then you notice, oh, there's a body here. Notice that you have a body. What's noticing? Not personality, what's noticing. The sheer fact of being conscious of the world. And that consciousness is arising dependent upon volitional formations, constructing activities. So here we come to the Buddha tackling what, especially modern philosophers, but in the Buddha's time, very much so as well, love to think about. It's just so baffling and so fun to think about. Mind and matter. Like, is this all just consciousness? Is the whole world just consciousness and matter is an illusion? You can meditate and you can see it that way. Is everything matter, which of course is what most of the neuroscientists say, and consciousness only an emergent property? They wouldn't have used that language, of course, but is consciousness just an emergent property of chemical reactions? And you get into the whole cognitive science thing, and there's Mind and Life Institute, and Mind and Life Institute has kind of been colonized by the materialist neuroscientists, and meanwhile the Buddhists are trying to hold some sort of, yes, consciousness exists, but does it exist? Tell me, does it exist? See, it can be intriguing. And so what? Welcome to a Metta business meeting. Welcome to you with your partners and spouses and best friends. And who cares? Well, what matters is this teaching as a practice and a guide for practice, and like a wedge into what is happening now. That's nama-rupa. So nama, name, mind, and rupa, form. Materiality, mentality and materiality. And the way to understand this right away and to feel it, we'll pause and give yourself a chance to do that, is to just ask yourself, what is consciousness knowing right now? Just have a look. Mindfulness is the practice of keeping this question I'm asking you in mind. So you're going to keep in mind the question I'm asking, which is, what is consciousness knowing right now? And you're just going to see what presents itself. Is there any denying a physical body? Would seem not. Is there attention given to, for example, feelings and perceptions? The fact of movable attention itself. Go ahead, pay attention to something intentionally. Let's say your butt on the chair or cushion. And then move it and pay attention to some thought or emotional state. Go back and forth a little bit and notice that there's a quality of attention. You can move that attention. So is there any object there? Is there a rupa? Is there a physical form? Or is there just the attention to it? What's that relationship between the knowing of the object through these feeling, perception, attention, intention, and the apparent fact of materiality? How is this useful? It's time for a cancer story. So here I am, contemplating this teaching pretty much all week, because nama-rupa has been a confusing teaching and can be a confusing teaching because it has so many layers. It's the only aspect of paticca samuppāda that is like two words, mentality, physicality, name and form, mind and matter, the two huge words put into this one link. And I don't remember the exact language Venerable Prunaji gave it, one of my teachers, but a rough quote or a rough in that direction was the psychophysical totality. So that which consciousness knows. So in an in a sense of like moment to moment, the subject, the thing that's going to feel like me, is still going to depend on consciousness, on the knowing. But what consciousness is knowing is this material world, all this stuff, and with the main point being internal rupa, external rupa, the same thing. Another way of saying that is we're all made out of the same elements. And a more poetic way would be we're all made out of stardust. Same stuff. Liquid, solid, whatever. Hot, cold, hard, soft. It's all it is. So, cancer story. So I'm pondering this and wanting to be able to speak it in a way that, whether it gets clear, I don't know. Whether it's clear to me, I don't know. But can at least be a good basis for investigation and practice for you as you inquire. What is this thing? What is this world itself that I'm making? And is there an option besides accumulation and suffering? So when I contemplate the rupa, the form, the materiality, I'm like in this place of, I don't want to overstate it, but something like a low-grade misery, not the highest grade misery, not Idi Amin, but, just my personal version of it. And, okay, I just bring forward nama-rupa, what's happening now with mentality and materiality. And all of a sudden, this body is just rupa. It's just materiality. It's just physicality. It's just mass. Liquid mass, gaseous mass, solid mass. It's just mass. And this mass has cancer, and it's not personal. And then, of course, I look at the attention, the intention. I look at the feeling, the pleasant and unpleasant, which was mostly, of course, unpleasant, and perceptions, the nama part. It's like, okay, that's what seems to be knowing or experiencing this result of physical dysfunction. But the sort of introduction of nama-rupa served, and I'll have to admit, just served temporarily to cut this identification with the psychophysical process. Now, was I bypassing my own suffering rather than like looking at it, going into it? In that moment, I was using the Dhamma to attain some kind of investigative objectivity. And trust me, I spent plenty of time turning towards the suffering and all that kind of stuff. I got lots of hours day and night. So I got like twice as much hours as everybody. I'm really lucky. So don't worry about that bypass thing right now. You might worry about it for yourself. That's up to you. Take a look. Am I using this because I don't want to face the pain of arguing with my good friend or this difficult decision? But sometimes it might be like, poof, nama-rupa, difficult decision. Rupa doesn't seem to matter much, except rupa is interactive with nama. It's a nama-rupa complex. So in the moment that you get all stressed out and your hormones start juicing their way through your brain and body, that's nama-rupa too, right? The physical state changes in response to the mental state. So there's a lot here. But what matters is how you access it as a practice and how it helps you understand where we're going next. Okay?
Can I ask a question? Or should I wait?
Well, I was thinking even that a little dialogue might be nice, but a question before the dialogue I think is fine, Michelle, sure.
I'm a little hung up first on the consciousness link, and then I guess it was the mental mind, or the, whichever. Anyway, about where I'm confusing it with mindfulness, because even in the
That's right.
Knowing, it's happening, is the consciousness happening no matter what?
Yes.
But when I'm aware of it, then it just doesn't make sense.
You just taught yourself and gave yourself the answer. Consciousness is happening even when there's no mindfulness at all. Okay. Go about your day. How are you going about lifting that pencil that you're completely unaware that you're lifting, or having that thought that you're not even aware you're having? There's consciousness there.
The term I have maybe
It's a deep inquiry, and I'm glad that you're young because you'll have a lot of years to totally fail at it like I have.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I'll let go. It's
a great inquiry, Michelle, really. Valuable inquiry. Okay, so if I could ask our Zoom Deva to, in a moment, I'll offer a contemplation to divide us into groups. Let's see, I don't know if we're an odd number or an even number or what we are. I will not practice if there's an odd number, because this is, I really want to right now still keep the dialogue one-on-one to keep it simple. And now I'll offer the contemplation. As you practice with your partner, I'd like to invite you to begin in the simplicity of internal exploration, silence. If you want to have your eyes closed, that's fine. And notice, to the extent that it makes sense to you, to the extent that you're able, that there's something being known. It might feel like that I'm knowing. It doesn't matter to me what, I'm not investigating that piece right now, but there's something being known. And what is it? And there's, as a starting point, I'd like you to have a look at rupa, or form, internally. So sense your materiality. Sense the hardness, feel the form, the rupa. Rupa actually means form, it doesn't mean materiality. So sense the form. Sense the, you might say, apparent existence of that form and the knowing of it. I'm going to say something about the knowing, and then I'm going to ring the bell. So, what's it like to be noticing the form? And in the knowing of it, whatever is noticing the form, the nama, the name, nama, name, same root. Look for the quality of attention. Look for that quality of mind that is the experiencing the pleasant, unpleasant, neither pleasant nor unpleasant nature of that, whatever is known, whether it's the internal, and in a moment you'll be going to the external form, rupa, rupa, same rupa. Notice that there are objects, whether it's your body is an object or the other person, an object, sanya, perception. And this one's more subtle, so only go there if it is not too much a mental load. And that is the intention, the sankappo, that all of this is arising with some kind of direction, some kind of sense of purpose, or the mind going somewhere with it. And don't try to unpack it, don't try to name it, don't have a big discussion about it. Just see if you can sense it. The attention, the feeling, the perception, the intention. All in this nama-rupa complex, name and form, mentality, materiality. It's about 8 minutes. Moment, we're participating in this psychophysical matrix. Any moment that you reflect on vijnana paccaya nama-rupa, it's an invitation to notice consciousness is the basis by which you're knowing this or experiencing this sense of a material world, a material body, this physicalness. And you can notice that there's the knowing of the mental aspect. And in such a moment, it's exactly like a kind of an intellectual steroid for pause, right? It's like, whoa, hey, like, well, look at this. And you cut this illusion of like that your matter is any different than like a light bulb, or that your mind, the activity of the mind, is somehow real. It's instantly, sankara paccaya vijnana paccaya nama-rupa. It's instantly at the tip of this fabricating wave. But that's the invoking of the Buddha Dhamma, of the formal teachings, in order to do this. So it's demanding. In meditation, where the body-mind is calming down, the investigation of nama-rupa is a natural occurrence, getting to something that was asked earlier, of mindfulness. Because you go to look at, oh, my knee hurts, and at some point a week later, or a few weeks later, or whatever your mind needs, you realize, oh, there's this materiality of me, and there's the attention to it, and you begin to investigate into that duality of mind and matter naturally. You don't have to have this conceptual aspect of it. And as you'll see, and I hope we have time to cover in the course of these talks, I don't know, I'm not going to push it, but when we get the whole map, if you will, or the whole schema of paticca samuppāda, what I began to see, no one taught me this, but it just popped out at me, is that each link is a family of meditation practices. And in fact, I began to realize that there are different teachers that are sort of focused, if you will, on certain links. They may not conceive of it that way, but Ajahn Soban was focused on nama-rupa. That was like his deal, his insights, his own personal insights as a young monk came up through the doorway of nama-rupa, and it formed the foundation of his teaching. Now, his English wasn't so good, and it was always hard to extract that. But it was there. It was absolutely there in his bearing, in how he lived his life. And so let's go on to the next link, the next two links, so that I can get to this relational piece. So we have this experience of mentality, of materiality, of the psychophysical totality of this being known by consciousness. So if there's no consciousness, there's no psychophysical totality. There's no experience happening at all. But once you have this body-mind, then what you have is the basis for parsing that out across the six senses. So as I'm speaking, I invite you to practice with this. Notice that there's hearing happening now, and that the hearing that's happening, which happens to include language and is very complex because of the way it triggers conceptual notions and so on, but just the hearing, if I could be dignified and make a bunch of noises, I would let you just hear that, but I don't have a way to do that right now. So there's hearing happening, and notice that there's another doorway, let's say of the body, and notice that that is a different doorway, the tactile sense, the proprioceptive sense of this body. If your eyes are open, look at the screen. Notice that they're seeing. And is seeing the same as hearing right now? No. It's a different set of electromagnetic waves instead of the pressure waves of the eardrum, or the chemical contact for sensation through the nervous system of the body. And smell, and taste, and mind. Six senses. The mind is just another sense. The mind knows its own fabrications, right? It makes up its own sensory data, which can cause a lot of problems, but we'll go into that some other time. So each doorway has its unique properties, and we build the world out of the totality. The Pāli word is salayatana, or six sense bases. So we have nama-rupa paccaya salayatana. So let me just ask you a logical question. If there were no material ear and all of the bones and cochlea and so on, would there be the possibility of the arising of an ear sense, of a sense base of hearing? Pity the poor devas. No body, no hearing. That's the old story in the suttas. I don't know. I don't know too much about that stuff. But that's what they say. They can't hear the dhamma because they haven't got ears. Slightly bizarre, but that's okay. So, same with the eye. No eye. No material base. No seeing. So the salayatana, we haven't gotten to seeing yet. We're just saying, looking at that paccaya, dependent upon. So when there's no nama-rupa, which has arisen dependent, remember, go back to ignorance, blindly arising, totally conditioned by the river, the energy of craving and clinging, the energy, the tanha, the pushing forward. We move through these constructing activities, the motions of the mind that yield consciousness, and the experience that consciousness knows of this psychophysical existence or psychophysical experiencing. And then, based on that, there's these specific sense spaces. Would there be any sense space without that experience of psychophysical entity? It's absurd. There couldn't be. And would there be any experience of psychophysical entity without consciousness? Not possible. I'm kind of answering the questions too, but you get the idea. Not possible. This gets really important when we start to look at the totality. So really keep it in mind. And any time that you pause and relax long enough into what are these, what's happening here and now, what's actually happening, then that opens a doorway to, okay, there's hearing, there's seeing, there's sensing with the body, there's sensing with the mind. There's this sense of this physicality, this physical reality. It's beginning to, there's some sort of physical world here, you might say. The mind is knowing this and experiencing it a certain way and intended a certain way. Oh, yeah, right. And this is being made, this is possible because there's consciousness right now. And that's coming up out of this river. And oh, there's the ignorance. There's the ignorance. I'm believing the whole fabricating process. Right? But that's where relax gets really important. Pause, relax, because you're not, the Buddha didn't have to pause and relax, all right? I mean, he was awakened. There are many people who have been awakened. And there's an instant knowing of this, a penetrating the knowledge and vision of release from the ignorance that falls into the trance of this fabricating process that we're talking about. Non-arising of avijja. Wow. Okay. One more link and then we can go to this other point. And this one is so important, I might even decide to spend the whole next talk on it. Salayatana paccaya passo, or passa, contact. So each instant contact arises associated with a specific sense door and the consciousness of that sense door, like seeing or hearing and so on. And this contact is the co-arising of three aspects. In the abstract, the external base, the internal base, and consciousness. And the reason this language is so careful, and I'm not going to try and parse this out, and it would be too much right now. We have somewhere else to go. But I really want you to have at least the beginnings of this foundation. The external base is like, let's say, I'm seeing you. I'm seeing that form out there. So it's the visible form of, let's say, Uli's face or Lori's face or something like that. The internal base is that there's the sense organ, the salayatana, and all of the mechanisms, if we want to get materialistic about it, for this to enter consciousness, awareness, and consciousness. Only when all three are present do you have phassa. No eye, no seeing. Nothing to see, no seeing. No consciousness, no seeing. So they're taught as co-arising. And there's a lot of implications of that, but it's the experience that matters to us. And the reason I might spend so much time on it, and I'm going to leave you with this now, is that each instant of contact is exactly the point of blossoming of the appearance and the specifics of the world. Phassa, contact. Contact. So with consciousness arising with each object that touches, the important piece here is that consciousness is, if you will, taking rise and taking form in this moment that you're hearing my words and everything, dependent upon this object. If there's nothing that consciousness is aware of, there's no consciousness. That's the Buddhist psychology. There's no consciousness. So consciousness can be aware of consciousness, or it can be aware of nothingness, or this very subtle neither perception nor non-perception. That's where you're getting to the edge of the cessation, right? Where it's like, okay, none of this is arising. None of this stuff we're talking about, the mind is so still. But here, we mere mortals, in our meta business meetings, in our personal relationships and everywhere, yeah, consciousness is arising, and yeah, it's like this. Contact. Phassa. Phassa, each instant of contact. So, consciousness is taking rise, dependent, if you will, based upon the external world. You see that? This is where it gets interesting. So now I go to the whiteboard. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but at least you can think kind thoughts. So, avijja, paccaya, sankara, ignorance and the arising of constructions. Sankara, paccaya, vijnana. From that comes consciousness. And we're going to be looking right in here. Vijnana, paccaya, nama-rupa, right? So the consciousness arises dependent. Nama-rupa, the psychophysical experience of ongoing living, of being, is arising dependent upon consciousness. No consciousness, no living, no sense of entity. And dependent upon this nama-rupa, you have the six sense spaces parsing out into, it's beginning to be like a world with specifics. And then the salayatana, paccaya, phassa, contact. Then there's the specifics of contact. And of course, when we go to the next steps, the blossoming of the specifics of the world, which enables our engagement in it. But is our engagement built around the avijja, the ignorance? Normally, yes. Okay, so here's the interesting thing that I want to touch on. Notice that vijnana is arising from internally based on the energy of sankara. Sankara, paccaya, vijnana. So I'm experiencing, let's say, offering this talk on the forward edge of the history of my life. Consciousness is arising, and it's like this. Like I see my own image on the screen and all the memories of whatever, looking in the mirror or being young or being old. And I look at, let's say, one of your faces. I look at Tao or Mary, and up comes the experience of Tao with all the fabrications and so on, plus all of the other things that come out of perceiving Tao or Mary, man, woman, and so on, and community. I look at the whole thing, I see community, there's a certain feeling. And this, as we talked about last week, can have roots in the wholesome, unwholesome stuff can be mixed in. We're complex creatures, you know, that's just how it is. But the fact is that we have this apparent experience of this world arising really formed by this history. Is that clear? And you've experienced something of that in your practice, yeah? Okay. So now look what we're saying. That pasa, which is contact, is the arising in each moment of the specific experience of what's being sensed, of the touch, contact, touch of the world. And consciousness is arising with each touch. So consciousness is arising, like if I let's say, look at the perception of Anita, and there's this perception arising out of contact, and we'll talk about this stuff maybe next week, that already, if Anita weren't there, that consciousness wouldn't be arising, and all of that particular mass of conditions would be different. And so the external world, and this is all in brackets, all of this stuff, external world, internal world, it's all fabricated, but I don't want to go into that right now. The external world is the basis for the arising each instant of consciousness, even as you hear me, as I speak, and the internal world. So right here, I hope this is visible enough, right here, we sit in between the internal emergence of consciousness based on our history and the external conditioned emergence of consciousness based on who and what is in front of us. Each thought, each person. So to make this as practical as possible, I'm going to ask you in a moment, I'm going to invite you into dialogue and invite you to contemplate just how is this experiencing, this knowing of the world happening right now. But so consciousness, this vijnana, remember vijnana arises as the basis of contact, of the experiencing of the world. This is the let's call it the inflection point of relationship. Each instant that I am experiencing relational contact, and this is your contemplation, so kind of listen deeply if you will. Each instant of experiencing relational contact is an instance of experiencing the manifesting of this archive or this momentum of sankharas that have arisen based on ignorance, just like, welcome to being human and having that be the case. Each instant, and each instant that there's contact, visual contact, auditory contact, sense, body sense contact with you, consciousness is arising dependent on that. And here is this experience now, this relational experience, right in the middle at each instant of this internal conditions and external conditions. Each instant. So in order to investigate this, your meditation guideline to focus on is open. So noticing the external base, noticing the other, and there's the consciousness arising dependent upon the other. Noticing the internal base, and consciousness arising dependent upon the ongoing stream of the fabricating energy. And the internal and external, the meeting of these, the relational experience of this meeting is this place where there's dukkha or cessation. When there's avijja, there's dukkha. When there's cessation, there's no dukkha. Okay. Here's a bell. It's humbling for me anyway, even just with the dialogue that didn't quite dialogue just now, but all the time to reflect that with consciousness arising dependent upon this ridiculous tangle of my history, that I can't even see you without that thick film of, let's call it for ease of use, me. And at the same time, there's a specific you. You know, there is this lived reality, this nama-rupa of you and of we. It's this tender attempt to not so much make sense of it, but to discern how do I move through this experience with skill, with non-harm? How do I move through this experience with aroused energy, not laziness, not turning off? And when we move forward, you're going to see how hard it is. Again, you guys all know this, how hard it is to move through it without leaping up at the self. And all of its strategies of connection and disconnection. A brilliant, brilliant formation from Jan and her team at Stone Center. The strategies of disconnection and the bid for existence that we offer each other. In this rushing stream of, oh, please, let me get stable, let me exist. Each instant, consciousness arising at the tip of that, and the world touches pasa. And the specifics of the world form like, what direction is this consciousness going of all of those sankharas? What's gonna spring to the surface now? Oh, it's Phyllis, of course, all that stuff's gonna spring to the surface. And when we're on our own, we don't even have the outer bearing. What arises, what springs to the surface, what becomes real is the ripening of mental fabrications as they have, you might say, the karmic energy to bloom. And in that ripe kind of fertile field of, oh, existence is like always ready to happen like this, that's where each touch, each passa, each contact, it's like, oh, here's the world. And in this, we do our best. Kind of provides another view, doesn't it, of the Buddha's emphasis on non-action, on cessation. When we see how entangled this can be. And of course, the self attached to action, coming to exist through its actions of thought and of body, of speech, gets very scared at that. It's like, oh, I won't exist. Oh, I won't exist. Oh, this is really terrible. What's going to happen? I don't exist. I don't exist. Well, hello. But the reflection of the non-arising of this tendency towards being fettered, towards entanglement, is the distinct possibility of the third noble truth, of what is often shorthanded to freedom. Freedom has the difficult tendency of implying an agent who is free. So it's a little bit problematic. But if we can constantly remember to sense into, regardless of our depth of meditative experience or insight or any of this, just to really begin to invoke the teaching and sense into the potential of experience that is unfettered, unbound. And then when there's any touch of such an experience, any moment of clear knowing in the heart of, let's say, compassion for another or sympathetic joy, any moment, let's say, of stillness and sensory release, whatever it is, wherever it is that you touch, the unbinding begins to fit into a sense of possibility in this very life. Good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end. So the word end is a good last word, but if I could just orient once more. As for the qualities of which you may know, these qualities lead to dispassion, not to passion, to being unfettered, not to being fettered, to shedding, not to accumulating, to modesty, not to self-aggrandizement, to contentment, not to discontent, to seclusion, not to entanglement, to aroused persistence, not to laziness, to being unburdensome, not to being burdensome. You may categorically hold, this is the Dhamma, this is the Vinaya, this is the teacher's instruction. May you all live with ease and insight. Thanks a lot.